Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. Just going to start this by having a look at those really cool stamps that are on this parcel that's been sent to me by a chap called Stephen. And inside are a couple of Hornby and Triang 9f's. The Evening Star, which you can see there, is a standard ring-filled tender drive model. But the black one that I'm just unpacking now is actually a silver seal model. And it becomes apparent immediately what the problem is, as the tender and Loco should be permanently connected with those wires. So you can see we've got some problems straight from off the bat. The smoke box door is also loose and missing off the black version, but it is included in the box, so we'll have to refit that again later on. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus solely on the silver seal model, as I've serviced and shown you ring-filled services many times in the past. I'm just going to put that smoke box door back on the model there so I don't lose it, and this is a simple clip fit in place. That will be held in later on with some satin varnish just to keep it where it should be. The Loco wheels on the black model are extremely stiff. They are not free turning at all. This, as I said, is the standard ring-filled model. As I said, I've serviced these many times in the past. And this one is a lot more free running. So I will service them both, but the video will focus on the black version. There are a couple of interesting differences between these two models as well, which I will highlight later on. So doing a quick battery test on Evening Star, you can see it's trying to run there, but the wheels are actually locking up in the front, preventing it from running. So this is going to need some work to its side rods, I'd imagine. The black one, as I said earlier, it does not run freely at all. If I gently push that, it is extremely stiff, and I'd imagine that the old lubrication has turned into a jelly-like substance, which is stopping the wheels rotating. To remove the body shell, you need to remove this screw at the back here. This goes through to the cab floor, and once this has been removed, you can unclip the chassis from the body shell. It comes out like that, although it is pretty sticky. There's a fair bit of gunk in this, and also that plastic on that screw holder there is cracking, so we're going to have to sort that out as well. I then remove the front pony wheel. Now this has a spring in it, so be careful, you don't want to lose the spring. Once the screw has been removed, you can see there the spring. I'm just putting that in the magnetic tray. And now it's time to remove the base keeper plate. Now what is interesting about this model is the fact that this has got separately fitted pickups to nearly all of the Loco wheels. This is an older model than Evening Star, and to have this amount of pickups on an older model and a permanently coupled tender with soldered wire connections is very reliable. It seems a retrograde step that Hornby got rid of this method. As predicted, there's a lot of sticky oil in there that has congealed, so all this is going to have to come out and be cleaned up. And it is nice to see that all these wheels are in proper brass bearings. So using a cotton bud of methylated spirits, I'm going to give this a quick wipe over just to see what we're dealing with. And you can see the horrible orangey yellow grease that's coming off. This is going to need a proper thorough clean. So initially what I did was I started by doing one wheel at a time, so that I didn't have a lot of crank pin screws, etc. all over the workbench. So I'm going to start with the front driving wheel, and all of the crank pins on this model, they're all screw fit. There's no push fit or anything on this model. They're all miniature screws. So here we have one of the drive wheels, and it is pretty manky, if I'm honest. So I'm going to use a cotton bud of mess again just to get in there and clean that bearing housing out. And then I'm also going to use a cotton bud of mess to clean all the old congealed oil and grease from around the bearings and off the wheel backs. But judging by the viscosity of this, I may have to use some of the old contact cleaner just to cut through the majority of the grease. So that's this is the first wheel virtually done now, and I'm just going to clean those wheel backs properly because this has got pickups on it obviously. And then I put that back in place, put a tiny amount of oil on it, on the bearings, and then when I start spinning the wheel, you can see there that is spinning lovely and freely. The wheels do have to go back in a certain way. One side obviously is insulated, so make a note of which side they go so you don't put them back in the wrong way round. After doing the one wheel, I decided to strip the whole thing down because the side rods needed a clean, and they're just demonstrating how free turning that cleaned wheel is as opposed to the non-cleaned wheel. I've also got to clean the wheel treads as there's quite a lot of carbon build up on these. So again, this is the front wheel that we've just cleaned, and I'm just going to clean the wheel treads there, and then the rest of it in this time-lapse footage I go on each individual wheel, cleaning all the bearings, all the wheel backs. They've all been cleaned, and the majority of this congealed horrible oil has been removed, and I did go through a copious amount of cotton buds during this restoration. But now you can see that all 5 axles are spinning nice and freely, and they've all been re-lubricated with a small amount of oil. Now the side rods on the model, they're also coated in a film of grease, so this will all need to be removed. Again, using the cotton bud and methylated spirits, I clean all the side rods up. This just ensures that no grease will spread back into those bearings when the model's in use. Everything then was put back together using these screws. Make sure that the side rods are the correct way up. There is a oil box representation on the side rods. This faces upwards. And the next thing to tackle was the pickups. Now, they're quite an awkward size and shape, these pickups. So cleaning them was quite difficult. So what I ended up resorting to was, after trying to clean them with a cotton bud and mess, I put them on my 9-volt battery just to support them. And I actually polished them up with my fiberglass pencil. And you'll see there the difference in the brass as to the not polished part and the cleaned part. So I work my way through and I clean all of the pickups up, and I also clean that tab at the back there to make sure that there's a nice area to key the solder to when I come to resoldering the wires back onto this brass part. These really were an awkward shape to try and get into to clean. The fiberglass pencil proved its worth again here, because this really did bring the brass up to a very nice shine. So you have to work gently as well with this, as you don't want to bend the brass out of shape. But once it was all cleaned, you can see here how nice and shiny they are. All that old crud and detritus has been removed. The first keeper plate goes on. This has got representation of springs on it. This fits in one way. And then the pickups go on top of this, ensuring that they are touching the wheel backs where they should be. It is quite a fiddly job to get them back into alignment, but it's well worth the effort. So that's one in, and then the other one's been put in. And then this bottom keeper plate, which I think is made out of Formica board, this goes on, and then the screws are reinserted. And that is all the axles and bearings fully serviced. Got rid of all that old congealed grease, and we can and they are all free running. So after I've screwed the keeper plate back on, it's time to reassemble the valve gear. The long side rod goes on first, followed by a washer, then the piston rod, and then the linkages. The linkages actually sit in a rectangular nobule that sticks out of the crank pin. And now that's done, you can see that is a lot more free running than it was. It's not as free running as the Evening Star one, because the drag from the pickups causes a little bit of drag, but it's a lot better than what it was. I'm now going to refit that front pony wheel. I just put the spring back in the hole there, and then give the front pony wheel a good thorough cleaning, which included dusting all the old dirt off it, and then cleaning the wheel treads again with a cotton bud and methylated spirits. So once this was done, we will turn our attention to the silver seal motor that's in the tender, and then reconnect the tender and the Loco and solder the wires back together. So now that that's all been cleaned, I can refit it to the model using the shouldered brass screw. I'm just using a cocktail stick here to get rid of a lot of the carbon buildup that was inside the wheel flange edges. The cotton bud and mess just wasn't moving it, so I had to get something to scrape the muck off that wheel. And then there's a small amount of oils dropped down there into the bearings, and that is the pony truck fully serviced and cleaned. And as I said, with the shouldered brass screw, this was then put back onto the chassis. The Loco body shell just needed a dust off. There was no real dirt on this, it was just dusty. So I gave it a good dusting over with my old paintbrush to remove most of the dirt. And then using a cotton bud dipped in some warm soapy water, I cleaned the running boards and all the little crevices of all the hard to reach dust that the brush didn't get off. And then the body shell was then replaced onto the chassis, as we won't need that off there anymore. And this goes back in by engaging those clips at the front in the smoke box, and then reinserting the screw at the back, which we took out earlier on. I will then fit that smoke box door, and this was put back in place using a bit of satin varnish just to hold it in place for the future. There's plenty of surface area on this to work with to put some satin varnish on it. Now, looking at the Evening Star, you can see the wheels here need some attention, but it really is, in my opinion, it was a retrograde step from Hornby to remove all those pickups from the drive unit of this 9F. So that's the smoke box door back in place. Now we're going to look at the silver seal motor, which is in here, the tender body shell I've already unclipped earlier. And to remove the motor, you have to remove the weight as well, as the screws go through the weight, through the chassis and into the actual chassis of the tender wheels where the motor's kept. So once the weight has been removed, the motor just simply drops out from the bottom, and I just pull those wires out. The tender chassis is in relatively good condition, only requires a dust over, although there is a piece of plastic that has broken off there. Now this is part of the tender body shell securing clips, so I am going to replace this and glue it on with some super glue, otherwise the tender body's not going to go back on properly. So just using a small amount of this Bostik super glue, just dabbing a bit on the tender frame there. I put the clip in the right way around and then put it off to the side to thoroughly set while I service the motor. So once that's in place, we're going to look at the silver seal motor, and this is a virtual carbon copy of a Fleischmann motor. Very easy to work on. The motor faceplate is held on with 3 screws, and it is a better way than the plastic ring-filled motor, which clips into place, and the clips are easily broken. With this being screwed in place, it's very rare to break the faceplate of these models. So once all 3 screws are removed, the motor faceplate is lifted off and the brushes and springs come off as well. And you can see there that there is quite a lot of dirt on that commutator. In fact, it's virtually black. So with a cotton bud and meths, as usual, I'm going to start cleaning the commutator faceplate up. This did take a lot of work. I removed most of the loose dirt with a cotton bud and methylated spirits. I then found out there's a fibre washer there, so that's been put aside so that I don't lose it. And the really hard, stubborn deposits on the commutator were polished off with a fiberglass pencil. This takes the muck away and goes back down to the brass. If you work gently, you don't scratch the brass plates. That was then again polished with a cotton bud and meth just to remove any loose bits, and then the gaps in the commutator were cleaned out with a cocktail stick. I'll get my words right in a minute. But you've got to clean out these pieces, otherwise the buildup of carbon can cause short circuits and burn the motor out. So now that the commutator's polished and is shining like new, the brushes and springs need a good clean, as does the back of this faceplate. There is a lot of oily carbon deposits, and I think that in the past some lubricating oil may have got onto the commutator, hence why it was so dirty. So there we go, that is the motor faceplate there. and I'm going to give the brushes a quick clean up. Now what I should have done was put these in some metal cleaner or some brake fluid just to draw out that old oil, but I didn't have any with me at this time, but I gave them a good clean with some cotton bud and methylated spirits. And then I put the brushes back on the springs, line everything up and put the motor faceplate back on. Now it's a bit of a strange way of doing it this time. I didn't want to take the brush holders off the front of the motor as they were in pretty tight, and undoing them might have made them loose and they might just fall off. But I lined everything up and got it back where it should be, and then reattached the 3 brass screws. And I also put a small amount of lubricating oil on that bearing there. The cogs on the back were cleaned with a cotton bud of meths. Now these are held in place with a rather horrible spring clip, which is a pain in the ass to remove, so I didn't remove it. I cleaned all the gears around by turning it. The battery test proves that the motor's running. Oh, and there you go, that's the small bearing that I'm putting a tiny amount of oil on. So now that's all done, the wires are threaded through the chassis of the tender, and the motor is then put back in place. And this will only go obviously back in one way. You've got to make sure those wires are correct. And then the wires are then fed back through the tender chassis where the tender drawbar is, and then they'll be soldered onto the boiler section of the Loco very shortly. So now they're in place, the weight goes on, and underneath the die-cast weight is a gap that is cast into the weight casting for the wires to sit on. Once they were all in place, the weight was screwed back into the chassis, and by doing that it reassembles the whole thing. So I'm just trimming the wires here, just cutting some insulation off, making a fresh solder joint, and now in my Loco cradle the model is upended. The tender drawbar is reattached using the screw that was handily still in the Loco section, and that is the Loco and tender reconnected. And then, having tinned the wire, the wires for the pickups are then resoldered to those brass tabs. And there you go, that's the Loco and tender fully serviced, reconnected, fully cleaned and lubricated, and hopefully we've reactivated this 9F. I'm actually after a Silver Seal 9F for myself, because that amount of pickups and a replacement CD motor should make for an interesting DCC conversion of this model. Now, despite putting that clip back in, that tender body shell is still rather loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a bead of satin varnish around the edge just to secure that into place. Here we are doing a battery test on the 9F, and as you can see it is running nicely, whereas before we couldn't have even tested this as the model wasn't connected to its tender. So as I said earlier, the Evening Star, the Ringfield model, this was serviced as I've done in many videos in the past. Doing a battery test on this proved that it was a very sluggish runner, and again this was very dirty and needed a good cleanup. You can see here underneath the lack of pickups on this model, unlike the black one. So this just picks up from one side of the rail, and then the tender's left to pick up from the other side. It really was a retrograde step from Hornby to remove those pickups. Here I've got the base plate off Evening Star, and you can see the grubby congealed oil again underneath that bearing plate. So this was serviced in exactly the same way as the black one. Everything was taken off individually. Then some of the crank pins needed straightening out because they were catching as they were going around. But other than that, it was a relatively straightforward restoration on the green 9F as well. There was a bit of green gel, if you like, over the cylinder crossheads on this, but again that was all cleaned off. And here you can see me bench testing both the 9Fs. This is the black one that we tested before, now running under controller power. And here we see Evening Star again running nicely. Now coincidentally, after Stephen had sent me his 2 9Fs, another chap contacted me called Paul, who sent me another 2 9Fs, again a black and a green one. So these are both the black one's a Ringfield model and the green one is a Silver Seal, although it doesn't have the pickups on it. Although the black model had a problem that I've never come across before with a Hornby 9F. and it is worth having a look at if you ever buy one of these on the second-hand market. It became apparent that the black one, the wheels were suffering from Mazak rot. As you can see here, the driving wheels on the black 9F that Paul sent had corroded and crumbled away. I had never seen this before on a Hornby tender drive Loco, so it is something to look out for in the future. I did fully service Paul's two 9Fs, and I got a brand new set of wheels for his black 9F, and these were serviced and returned to running order, and were returned to Paul at the same time as I sent Stevens. You can see here just how brittle that Mazak rot makes these drive wheels, as with very little effort the wheel just crumbles in my hand. This is a bane of Mazak rot, and it ruins perfectly good models. That is just disgraceful. I've never come across this on a tender drive model before. Another thing with Paul's 9F was the fact that the Evening Star model, the grease had solidified in this model to such an extent that it actually prevented the wheels from turning around at all. As you can see, it takes great force to get those wheels to turn. And this was the fact that the grease had almost solidified. By taking the base keeper plate off this model, you can virtually see that everything is locked solid with this horrible green congealed grease. But as I said, these two 9Fs were fully serviced as well, and they were back to running order and sent back to Paul. So back to Stevens' 9Fs. These were now done and they pose on the workbench. They can be picked up on the second-hand market relatively cheaply, and that silver seal model there with all those pickups is well worth getting in my opinion. They are an excellent model for their age, and they are suitable for the budget modeler. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at the email address on screen now, and we'll have a look at getting it sent over, and who knows, they may even feature in an episode all of its own. The 9Fs were given a spin on Trains for You's test layout, as I still don't have a DC layout to run them on at the moment. So I'll leave you watching the 9Fs having a spin. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you again in the next video. Bye for now. Only some of it.